Broxmeyer. Joining me from Canada is Joe Yang.
Whoa! Hey, how's it going?
And his friend, new Pause and Select staff writer, Chris.
That's so misleading. I feel bad. I'm gonna have to write about Matt Pack DLC just to get something up.
If you want to hear, if you want to read more from Chris, contact us at squarespace@pauseandselect.com, which is a real email address that we definitely have.
I hear that's an exciting way to build websites.
Definitely is.
Right?
In fact, Pause and Select, if we didn't run it on WordPress and was sponsored by Squarespace, may have actually been built on Squarespace.
So, if you're a regular listener, you may notice that Brian is not here. It is unfortunate because Brian is the guy who organizes these things and makes them go okay. So, chances are, this thing is going to run sort of wonky.
What happened was Brian was at a Taco Bell, and a man had a heart attack. But while that man had that heart attack, another gentleman was trying to mug him. Brian fought off that man and was able to somehow miraculously resuscitate the man from the brink of a heart attack. So now he is being brought to the hospital and the police station concurrently, essentially, to stand as a witness to his own heroism. So if you want to send any sort of congratulatory email, or if you have any questions for Brian when he comes back on for the next podcast, definitely email us at squarespace@pauseandselect.com. Again, that is squarespace@pauseandselect.com, especially if you're from Squarespace.
You know you have to now pay WordPress for that email address, right? It's now got to be a real thing.
Wait, you didn't already say
addresses?
No, I thought didn't you already make Squarespace at pauseandselect.com? Isn't that like already a thing?
I haven't yet, but I can do it tonight.
Yeah, please do.
So I bought Far Cry 4 when it was on sale on Steam. What was that, last weekend? The weekend before that?
I believe.
Far Cry 4 was cheap, and I thought, hey, I liked Far Cry 3 for the 2 hours I played it. I'll try playing 4.
How cheap was it?
Maybe like 30% off. It was around like $35.
That's, for any of our listeners who are confused, that's essentially $7 US.
Yeah, that's right. I played some Far Cry 4. The story in that game doesn't try and make me care about it at all. Like, I just felt so directionless playing Far Cry 4, and all it made me do was get, like, really curious about, like, thinking about how open-world games work and where open-world games got started from. So I stopped playing Far Cry 4 after 2 or 3 hours. I figured out the loop was that you go liberate radio towers and then liberate outposts, and then when you get bored, you decide to play the story where they introduce new enemies that are total bullshit. I decided to buy another game that recently came on sale. Super Mario 64 on the Wii U Virtual Console.
Have you played the previous 63 of them?
Yeah, I'm really familiar with that first 63. Mostly on the Super Nintendo Entertainment System. I played Super Mario World, which I think is Super Mario's 4 through 63. It's an episodic sort of journey for Mario in that one. I've been playing Super Mario 64 a bit. That game holds up really well. It's a pretty good game. Who knew? Super Mario 64, one of the classics.
On the Wii U, does it have like dual analog, whatever? Like, how does the control work?
I'm playing with a Wii U Pro controller, and I imagine the control sticks on the gamepad are similar. It basically turns them into digital joysticks. It reduces them from the sort of analog movement that they have down to, I think it's probably 6 or 8 way on the left one, and then 4 on the right one, which is now the C buttons. So it's not really dual analog, but you use both analog sticks.
That's weird, because, I mean, the thing about Super Mario 64 was that it was the first thing to use the pseudo-analog stick that was the Nintendo 64's selling point, or one of it.
Yeah, it's really about an 8-directional stick.
Weird.
There's no problems with the left stick. The weird thing is, because the C buttons are only 4 directions, sometimes I'll be trying to get the camera to go right, and it'll end up going up and zooming in, and I'll just get frustrated. But the camera in that game isn't much of a problem. I was surprised by how much like Super Mario Galaxy it is. Like, you can see a lot more than I remembered. I thought it was a much tighter perspective. I remember the camera being bad, and it turns out, no, it's good. It's like playing the first level of that game, I was amazed just by how much everything stays in your field of view, how well designed it is, just really smart, kind of inventive platforming. Sometimes it asks precision that isn't really possible with the controls. They're a little bit floaty, but it holds up remarkably well, and because I was thinking about open world games when I played that ended up being kind of a mistake, because the worlds in that game, by contemporary standards, are tiny. Very small. Like, when I was a kid, I remember playing Super Mario 64, hopping into a world and thinking it was like this huge open space where you could go anywhere, and no, they're not that big. They're like really like they're like the stages in the first area of like Super Mario 3D World. They're about that size, which is strange to think about contextually. But yeah, I'm enjoying it for $10. Maybe it should be $5, but it's really cool to kind of go back and play an old game, especially from that era, and not just kind of grossed out by how chunky the graphics are. It actually holds up pretty well.
That's good. That's good. Joe, what did you play?
Well, other than having Brian force frog fractions on me, I've been playing a little bit of Pokemon, a little bit of Ultimax. I've started playing Dragon Age Inquisition again. BioWare recently released the Black Emporium DLC, which is amazing because it's probably the best DLC they've ever released. Fuck Lair of the Shadow Broker.
Wait, the best DLC that BioWare has ever released, or for Dragon Age specific?
Ever. Like, ever.
Okay.
What's the Mass Effect 3 DLC where it's just like a clip show of all the best moments?
Citadel.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Come on. It's not bad.
But it's better than the Citadel DLC because, first off, it's free, and second of all,
I take it all back.
And second of all, it gives you access to a mirror where you can change your character appearance mid-game. So if it's just like, oh, I am role-playing as the Inquisitor, and right now my Inquisitor just got herpes. Well, I need to change the appearance of my Inquisitor to reflect that. So I can go into the place and change the appearance of my Inquisitor, and I can come out, and then everybody's going to be all like, oh, Inquisitor, how come you got herpes? And then I can send them off to their death in a war table mission, because I can do that thanks to the Black Emporium DLC, courtesy of BioWare. Back to you, Alec.
Well, all right then. So I actually just a couple of hours ago got home from playing an upcoming game called Splatoon. I think that Splatoon is going to be a really, really interesting game, and I think people are going to like it, and some people are going to hate it. And the people who are going to hate it are anyone who's expecting something traditionally shooter-like. The build I played wasn't done, despite the fact that the game has to be done by now, because it's coming out at the end of this month. For example, I couldn't turn off the tilt controls. So currently, as it is, you move your character with your left stick, and you can move your camera right and left with the right stick, but you do the majority of your aiming by tilting the gamepad. I was told that when the actual game comes out, you will be able to turn off motion controls. And it was funny because the guy who told me that said it disdainfully. If the motion controls don't work for you, it'll be an option. And I was like, okay, dude, whatever. That said, I played some of the single player, some one-on-one, and some 4-on-4. Having to do that with the controller, having to move it around, actually wasn't as complicated as I expected it to be. It's not as easy as regular dual analog controls, but it's also not the worst. And I think part of that comes down to the fact that precision is not really that important in the game. There are 3 modes, as far as I can tell. There's one-on-one, which has you shooting balloons and shit. Then there's a single player, which has you shoot. The single player is actually structured a lot like Super Mario Galaxy. Yeah, right. Precision doesn't matter because in all of the systems, it's not deathmatch. You can kill your opponents, blow them up by hitting them with enough paint, And one of the weapons actually is like a sniper rifle, and that is a lot harder than I think it should be. But the other weapons, one of them is just a paint roller, which you don't really aim at all, but even like the main gun, it's not about precision because what you're really trying to do is just get paint everywhere. Or you're trying to hit like big blobs and things. It's very simple in a different way from point, gun, kill, man is simple. Your goal isn't point, gun, kill, man. It's point, gun, blow up, man, turn into squid, float, throw bomb, whatever. It's both deceptively complicated and deceptively simplistic.
So when it's not deceiving you, what does it do?
It's making you happy, is what it's doing. It is undoubtedly, unquestionably a Nintendo game. I've heard people be like, this doesn't feel like a Nintendo game, and those people are definitely stupid, because it is as Nintendo-y a Nintendo game as it can be. I mean, right down to the structure of the single player. I don't know if this is just a requirement for them now, but the way the single player levels work is it's like a Mario. You go to like a hub that is disconnected from everything else, and then some enemies show up and you shoot them or whatever, and then you get to the end of it and it shoots you to the next little like chunk of blocks, and then you do the shit there that you have to do, and then you go to the next block and the next block. And so like everything since Super Mario Galaxy has sort of had this little like, system, and Splatoon is the same way. And I mean, it allows them to put more complex worlds on using more limited hardware. And so I understand conceptually, why they do that, but it's interesting. What it actually reminds me a lot of is Tag. Did you guys ever play Tag?
Nope.
Do you know what it is?
You mean the children's game Tag?
It's it was the game that had a paint gun that Valve bought the team of, and that work ended up going into Portal 2 and becoming the gels.
Right now this is, and probably is a bit reductive, it sounds like that mode in Tony Hawk when you're trying to paint more of the stage than the other person.
That is reductive, but the turf war mode, that's what you're doing. The goal is to have more of the world painted. But it's more complicated than that. So, for example, like I was playing a level, and so it's 4-on-4, and it's squad-based. You start off with a weapon. There are 3 rounds. You choose a weapon at the start, and when I played it, I don't know how much this will or won't change. You can get a paint roller, you can get a assault rifle, basically, and then a sniper rifle. The sniper rifle is pretty much only useful for offensive purposes. The paint roller is just for getting paint everywhere. And then the assault rifle is very inaccurate, but shoots a decent amount of paint, but does have range, whereas the roller has none. So the way the game works is you can't go up steep inclines as a human. So you paint everything, and then you can turn into a squid, and the squid can swim through the paint and, go up half pipes and things like that. You spend a lot of the time being a squid, going within your own paint. You recharge your paint by turning into a squid and going within the paint. So you technically have an infinite amount of paint, because if you're running low, you can shoot some paint right below you and then go into that to refill. It's not like you ever have to worry about running out, but it is technically limited. I was playing, and there were these 3 people from the other team had bottlenecked into a half pipe that was about halfway across this map. And, I saw that all of them coming to that point. And so I shot a bunch of paint right around me, filled up my tank, and threw a bomb, because you can have paint bombs right at the top of the half pipe, because I knew that they were all trying to get up it. And boom, killed all of them in one go. And so it's like that sort of thing that required figuring out what they're trying to do, how they're trying to do it, and timing it to get it right. I did it right that one time. I fucked it up way more times than that. Trying to get that and trying to figure out tactics is absolutely going to be fun. And, having multiple maps, as I assume. The big question really is how much shit is this game going to have? Nintendo games as of late have gone for all of the stuff in it you could ever possibly want sort of thing. Super Mario 3D World has an obscene number of levels, and I'm really hoping that Splatoon follows that, because I could see it getting old if there's not sort of like constant variety.
Okay, that's actually kind of worrying, because Captain Toad and that Kirby game they put out apparently were very slight releases. I'm a little nervous that depending, this could maybe end up more like those.
Well, see, I mean, Captain Toad was also released for $40 and not at full price. And I would argue that Captain Toad had as much content as it needed to. I didn't feel like it was short, really. I mean, it has like 3 sub things. Like it felt like it was enough for me. I don't feel like Splatoon really needs that much, but it does need, I think if it has like a dozen maps, 20, 30 single player levels, it would be cool if there was more, but that would be sort of a solid base. And I hope that this is a game where Nintendo decides to experiment with DLC, because I definitely think this would be a good place for them to like keep adding maps down the line. However, American companies who have been doing this shit for years still sort of fuck that up. And so I don't know that I trust Nintendo to successfully pull off, segmenting the user base.
I'm cautiously optimistic. I think the core gameplay sounds interesting, based on what you've described. I think there's stuff that could sound cool. I'm just worried that it could be too slight, which you brought up, and does it control tightly? Like, does it need to control tightly, or is it a little loose?
That's a question of what it will be like when it's actually dual analog. When you're using motion control, that shit's loose as fuck. However, the only time it ever bothered me was when I was trying to use the sniper rifle. Because of the sort of inherently inaccurate just using paint for shit, paint that sort of goes everywhere, it's not about precision, and so having a control system that isn't exactly precise isn't actually problematic. It will be problematic if the game turns out to sort of require precision in later levels or whatever. If you have the option to use dual analog sticks and that adds the precision you need, then it's sort of a non-issue.
Okay. And they haven't gone the other route I feared when they first revealed it and made this like a 6 to 10 kids first Call of Duty. This isn't left trigger, right trigger, just on a really dumbed down scale.
Yeah, it's not at all. And
okay.
I've been thinking about it. Like it is the anti Call of Duty. You do shoot with one of the triggers and you throw your bombs with like the bumper button. Pressing L doesn't zoom into your sights. It turns you into a fucking squid. It's
like Halo then?
Yeah, right, exactly. It's a very weird game, and it's a very unique game in a good way. And I think that I trust Nintendo to have enough stuff in it. I'm hoping they use Mario Kart 8 as sort of, if you were to say, oh, Nintendo is making a competitive online shooter, Splatoon is probably what you'd think of. It's not Call of Duty. It's not Battlefield at all. It's family friendly, which is not meant in a derisive way at all. I mean, this is a shooter that I would happily play with my younger sister. It's only really a shooter in the vague sense that you sort of have a gun and pressing a trigger does make it spew out things. Did anything happen in video games since the last time we did one of these?
Not that I know of.
What about ukulele, guys?
What was that?
The Project Ukulele, which is the Banjo-Kazooie spiritual successor.
Yeah.
Oh,
The Naked Animals.
right.
Yeah.
Cool.
I think this is the stupidest thing in the world. Everyone's so excited for this game. Why? I have no interest in Banjo-Kazooie, that style of game. Why do people want to play 3D platformers?
I mean,
didn't we realize
says
they were
the
boring?
person who played Super Mario 64 earlier today.
In context, it's an old game. I don't want a new one. I'm enjoying the old ones. But what more can you do?
Do you not like, say, Super Mario 3D World?
I played Nintendo 3DS one. Was that 3D or 3D Land?
That was 3D
Super
Land.
Mario
Yeah.
3D Land, and I enjoyed it. Nintendo makes those games that look incredible, and Mario usually does something a little different. But I mean, if we're just saying let's make a new Banjo-Kazooie and maybe the world will be bigger, or you'll be able to turn into more stuff, like I don't think that's very interesting.
That's valid. I mean, I'm not comparing anybody to, like, Nintendo EAD2 or whichever team it is that, like, makes these amazing games, because they are easily one of the best development houses in the entire fucking world. But I think just dismissing 3D platformers in general is going a little too far.
It's not that I'm dismissing the 3D platformer in general. It's that, like, after Jak and Daxter came out and they went to Jak 2, and, you know, after the first Ratchet and Clank, even those games, which were pinnacle 3D platformers when they came out, they had to start doing different things. Like, I don't want to go back to what 3D platformers were on the N64, and that's what it seems like a lot of people are really excited about.
Yeah.
And it's just, those were kind of like really simple games about just trying to collect a bunch of different things. And like, so many games now have discrete areas you get to travel to and then do a variety of platforming in or have to complete a bunch of tasks. Like a game like Infamous, which it's what a modern 3D platformer looks like. It's an open world game, so it has some open world problems, but that's where the 3D platformer went. I don't necessarily want to go back and say, oh, now you jump into paintings, and those paintings are discrete little areas that in a modern game would just be part of a bigger world. Like, it seems like a backward step.
Yeah. I mean, there's nostalgia, and then there's nostalgia. And going back to 90s game design, or late 90s game design, right? Mid to late 90s. Yeah. This is actually sort of conceptually interesting, the idea of, you know, when Mega Man 9 was retro or whatever, when the 80s were retro, that sort of makes more sense because those games were simple in a way that games just aren't anymore, but not necessarily in a good way. Like, you know, Mega Man is simple, but there have been later games, but that doesn't make the original games not compelling. Whereas Mario 64 might hold up, but the early Banjo-Kazooie doesn't necessarily, because it was a game that was limited, you know, had aspirations to be larger. A game that takes advantage of its limitations and is not held back by them is going to hold up a lot better than a game that should have been on a different platform, but the technology wasn't there for it. And I think that more problematic grouping is most early 3D games. And so going back to them as though they were some kind of heyday and not the start of something cool, I think that is conceptually problematic, because they were not like the good old days of 3D platforming.
Yeah, it's a lot of those games, like when I think back to the PSX era or the N64 era, those games just feel like they were a stepping stone to where we got later.
Yeah.
Like, they were key texts in a, like, historical sense. Like, if you play Ocarina of Time, aspects of it hold up, but you can also see, like, oh, Nintendo took a ton of stuff from Ocarina of Time, mechanically speaking. Like, this game has the DNA of future games. But a lot of games from that era are just, like, trying to figure out how certain ideas can work. Like, I love Mega Man Legend, but I would rather play a game that controlled like Gears of War than controlled like Mega Man Legends. Like, it just feels like they were trying to figure out how to do certain mechanics. Like, when they were trying to conceptualize a third-person shooter, they didn't necessarily know, like, how's the player supposed to aim? How do we manage that? Do we use a lock-on targeting system? Like, how do we figure all that stuff out? And games since then have just sort of solved these problems. So the idea that, oh, we're going to make a new Banjo-Kazooie, it's like, we already took the good stuff from Banjo-Kazooie. Assassin's Creed is where Banjo-Kazooie went. Batman is where Banjo-Kazooie went. Why do we need another game like that?
Yeah, I mean, well, so hopefully they can pull a Nintendo and take, you know, this sort of older setup and make it feel fresh. I don't really trust Kickstarter anymore. The thing is never going to be as good as they're selling it to be. And so, you know, they can have these grand ideas all they want. You know, I don't know. I'm kind of disillusioned with Kickstarter now, which is very weird because it happened after I ended up on the creator side of it. It does get to a far more interesting thought about the history of video games and like what is the role of games like this. You know, should we have young children play Banjo-Kazooie in order to understand where this other thing came from? But I think that idea is way larger and way too complicated to have right now. That seems like its own podcast.
The funny thing, too, is today I saw a teaser for this indie Japanese horror game where the creator is trying to deliberately make it look like a 1995 Sega Saturn game. So it looks jaggy, the textures are warping, and the only part of the game he showed was a guy walking in a room, so it did not make it scarier. But it was just weird that, like, I have this nervousness that, like, people are getting really into the low polygon aesthetic of the PSX and N64 and Sega Saturn, the lowest polys of all, era. And, like, that's an aesthetic that I don't think... it's not the next pixel art, guys.
I remember when retro games were coming back, people were like, so where does it end? You know, NES and SNES games can still look great. Is anyone actually nostalgic for the PSX and N64? And I guess that answers the question that I guess so.
Yeah, people who grew up playing those systems, I guess, have a strong affection, not just for what those games were, but I guess how they look, too.
As someone who grew up playing those systems, I don't.
Yeah, I don't. I love Final Fantasy 7 through 9. Do I want games to look like Final Fantasy 7 through 9 today? Hand-drawn backgrounds can be pretty, but no thank you. I'm okay. I'd like them to make games to scale when they can, or choose something that's maybe, like, where you can show off your art a bit more. When you have to warp textures and have low poly counts, you're making art look bad. Like, you're choosing a purposefully ugly art direction.
I just want the anime girls to be more high def. That part is sick.
Totally unrelated. Did you see that the Oculus Rift is coming out first quarter of next year?
Yeah, for the quarter 1, 2016, right?
Yep. Which means the Vive is theoretically going to come out first. And the Rift and Morpheus are both supposed to come out first part of next year, which I think is super interesting. We've talked a lot about VR, and I don't know that we have anything new to say other than that the CEO, Brandon Irib or whatever.
I ripped for your pleasure.
Yeah. He said that he thinks the original system will do well, but what he thinks is going to do gangbusters is the follow-up that comes out a year or two later. But that means that they're sort of committing to a annual, biannual, semi-annual, whichever one means 2. 1 or 2 year biannual, annual or biannual update, like refresh cycle, which makes sense, but is also kind of interesting, and I think it'll be interesting to see how price affects that, because that makes it more like a cell phone than like a TV or a computer or something, because you don't replace a computer every 1 to 2 years. You replace a computer every 4 or 5 years, or a console every 4 or 5 years, but you replace a cell phone every 2. So I guess that's sort of what their goal is, that now it'd be interesting to see if there was some sort of like subscription model of sorts where you pay Oculus $15 a month or whatever, and they just keep sending you the new hardware every 2 years.
That's $75
I don't know if I'm going to be able to afford $75 Canada
a month for your Oculus subscription.
a month.
And it won't come out until 4 months later.
Yes.
So.
I love being able to play Sakura Spirit, but I don't know if I can play it in virtual reality.
Your import copy of Sakura Taisen for the Sega Saturn
Yes.
on your Oculus Rift.
Yes. I don't know if I want to pay $75 a month. I don't know, like 60,000 yen in Chinese. So it could be anything.
You
The world's
want
the limit.
the Chinese currency is...
Yeah. Unless I'm in Macau, then we're going to have to look at renminbi. I mean, like, it's just a complete clusterfuck. So based upon this experience, which is completely anecdotal, incredibly circumstantial, and only affecting me, I don't think that the Rift is going to be a success at all. Back to you, Alec.
I mean, I'm excited. I'm going to buy one, almost definitely. I'm really hoping that the office where I work sells them and gives employees a discount, because I want one, and getting one at less than retail price would be amazing.
Is there going to be like a guy like standing like outside your office in a cart? And he's going to be like, hey there, buddy, you want an Oculus? You ever tried virtual reality? I can give it to you.
Well, when the release of all these things turns our society into Neuromancer, absolutely.
Yes.
There will be homeless guys selling knockoff VR
Yes.
outside offices and other buildings and saying, hey, buddy, you ever experienced the virtual reality?
You there, you look like you gotta live. Why don't you live in a world where you don't?
Yep, basically. That's.
And then you put your Sega Saturn tapes
into the cartridge, into the holder for your Oculus Rift knockoff, and you're just like, wow, I've never seen a world so crisp and clear.
And then you put the Rift on, and you say it's 1995 forever.
I'm very curious. So they announced that it's coming. They didn't announce anything else about it, and they said over the next few weeks they'll talk about games and theoretically about their control interface and everything. And we've talked about what the price needs to be, and it needs to be like $300, maybe $350 with a control interface of some kind. But if they can hit that,
reality, everything's fucking bourgeois.
But I think if they can hit that, then there will be enough early adopters to make it worthwhile for people to continue fucking around with things. The DK1 and DK2 had sold, not insignificant, but really kind of insignificant numbers of units, but, still tons and tons of people developed for them. And so I think that's going to need to, I think that will continue, because the people it's going to sell to are people who are just going to want more VR experiences. I think that's actually one of the benefits of this, is that, of having an open platform sort of in general, is that people who want a VR experience, they're going to have to build that experience that they want. And if the tools make it easy for them to sort of, throw that out there, then that's good for everybody. And I think that's more true because this is sort of like a new medium, and everyone's still trying to figure out exactly what does and doesn't work. We're going to have a better chance of Joe's dancing made me lose my train of thought.
Hell yeah.
Yeah, I'm gonna come out of the closet here, guys. I'm a VR hater.
Really?
I don't think it's that interesting.
Have you?
I think it's like 3D. No, I haven't. So I have to confess, I haven't used contemporary VR tech.
Gotta use it.
It seems to me like 3D in movie theaters.
It's not.
It's another thing that it's like, yeah, we try it every 20 years or so, and maybe one day, and I don't think so.
It's not, believe me. This is someone who actively hates 3D in theaters because my eyes are weird and it just looks all interlaced and fucked up to me. The most important thing VR needs to do is demo properly, because I've now had 3 separate experiences with VR across 4 different hardwares. So I've used the Gear VR, Oculus DK2, I've used Crescent Bay, and I've used Project Morpheus. 3 of those were interesting. 1 of those was amazing. The only one that was amazing was Project Morpheus, because that was the only one where I was actually really in control of anything and had quote unquote presence. The things I did with Project Morpheus, between reaching out, grabbing a sword, pulling it back, using my other hand to grab a suit of armor's hand, pull out the hand, and cut off the arm perfectly with my sword, and then swing the hand around and then throw it. That whole experience, there is nothing like it anywhere in any way. The other demo, going down like a slalom as cars rush by you, and there's directional audio, so like a car, goes like, and you're like, ah! That shit is fucking amazing. And if people experience those things, they will be sold on VR as a concept. Not necessarily every single implementation of it, but they will be sold that it can be something that they've never used anywhere or done anywhere. It was those experiences that convinced me that I want to put down hundreds of dollars to get one of these things for myself, because holy fucking shit, that stuff was amazing. But I've also had experiences that were like, this will be cool, but it's also not that big of a deal. This is like 3D. The issue is trying to figure out what's the good stuff and how to make the good stuff really come up. Because I understand why you would be so negative, because in the past there's been a lot of garbage, and not everything that is currently working with the Rift is amazing. But there are some things that are just so freaking good that I think once people get their hands on them, they just won't be able to say no.
That's fair enough. I also think my other thing about VR, and this doesn't necessarily have to be a qualitative judgment on it. It's just, when you say it's a different medium, different experience, I 100% agree with that. And when you say things like being in a situation where you're slowing down something and there's cars going past you, I don't really want that experience. That sounds scary as hell to me. But there's people who are going to think that's cool, and that's okay. But I think the idea that VR for video games is going to be the next big thing, or it's the future of entertainment consumption, I just kind of sit there and go, no, it's kind of a different thing, and it'll probably appeal to some people, but I don't know if it's going to be huge. I lived through the first time we had VR, which was bad flight simulators at the Sega Palladium and the Virtual Boy and things like that. I don't know. It just seems like the next fad, not the next iPhone.
Yeah. I think it'll be somewhere in between those things, but I think in the long term it'll be the iPhone and not 3D again. We'll see. This is a conversation that once the price point has been announced and everything, we will definitely have this conversation again very soon. So I think we should probably leave it there. Did anything else happen in video games? I don't, as everyone knows, I don't actually care about video games or play them.
I don't follow game news. Brian is my game news feed.
I'm trying to remember what I've seen on NeoGAF. I normally just check the giant bomb and Formula 1 threads. So, do you want to talk about Formula 1? No.
I don't know anything about Formula 1.
I don't really want to either, so let's vroom past that. Dead Air brought to you by Squarespace.
Yes.
Contact Squarespace at pauseandselect.com.
That's right.
For more information on how to build stunning contemporary websites.
That's true. Chris, I wish that Kotaku Japan had a Squarespace equivalent, because I've heard that their SEO management is even better than ever.
Yes, and
It's Condom Day in Japan, and people keep screwing around.
So we should probably stop doing this, shouldn't we?
I don't know if we're going to find any more hard-hitting news.
I see a bunch of pictures of dudes' faces. I guess they're looking for the Zodiac Killer again.
Aren't we all?
Oh, yes.
There's some Pokemans. Joe, how's your Pokemon game going? Let's talk.
It's
Esport. It's time for the esports
report here with Joe Yang, Alec Kubismeyer, and Christopher Coughlin.
Staff writer.
Absolutely. And today we are talking about Pokemon and the competitive circuit in Pokemon. Currently, the most recent iteration is Alpha Sapphire and Omega Ruby. Now, Chris, I've heard recently that you are the two-time Finnish world champion in Pokemon.
Yes,
is that correct?
I qualified through my great-grandmother's aunt to play in Finland. I use a Blissey with that fucking Emperor Penguin guy tech. And, just between Surf Together and Blissey standing there and tanking all the damage, I can beat all those Finnish people who, there's about 4 other people, and they're all 5.
That is incredibly astounding. Now, I am assuming the competition is incredibly difficult to get past.
No, they're all 5 years old. It's pretty easy.
True story. Most of the people who are playing Splatoon with me were children under the age of 10. I'm not sure why there were so many children at this press event, but apparently the New York video game critics scene is made up primarily of 10-year-olds.
Considering the only people I know in the New York video game scene are Alex Navarro from GiantBomb.com, that checks out.
You know me.
Oh, also you. So that half checks out.
Half checks out. So there's 4 people.
Yeah.
Yeah. But, so that's whatever. I just thought that was kind of weird. I was like, oh, damn, I'm going to be beaten by a bunch of 10-year-olds, aren't I? And then my team proceeded to fucking whoop them. So.
Cool.
So you beat up a bunch of children.
Yes.
How was it, Alec? Did it make you feel powerful?
Yeah, it did. Because those kids had clearly been there all fucking day, and so they knew how to play, but then my team destroyed them.
I'm assuming it gave you a sudden rush?
Sure. Something like that.
When I get the feeling to play video games, I like to hit up the kind of rush that I only get from Haze. That classic PS3 shooter loved by the band Korn.
Absolutely. Now, if there's any game that deserves a Kickstarter for remaking, it's Haze.
I was convinced that you were going to go into a Squarespace ad right there.
Building websites for me is like a shit. And Squarespace is the shit.
No, I thought you were just going to be like, beating up children in video games is awesome. That's why we use Squarespace.
I know that from my Pokemon exploits in Finland. You know that from your recent exploits with the Splatoon. Joe, how's your Pokemon meta going?
It's been very exciting, Chris. Thank you for asking. I've actually been playing the VGC ladder, upon which I can easily and very quickly upload all of my stats onto a personal portfolio of my accomplishments beating 10-year-olds. You can find it, actually, at my website, which is hosted by Squarespace.
Is it actually?
No.
Hulu Plus.
Okay. And with that, I think it's probably time to bring this shit show to its conclusion.
20 minutes of fake ads.
If Brian has made this listenable and you've made it this far, we'd like to thank you for for everything it is you do. We are pauseandselect.com.
It sounds like the last episode. We'd like to thank you for everything you've done for us so far.
It's been a good run, you guys. Unfortunately, it has all come to an end.
Fox is pulling our $3 budget.
Unfortunately, our staff writer Chris, he died or something.
Yeah. He got a bout of malaria. and now he works at Audible, so we have a conflict of interest.
And as that was our primary
I
source
have
of
to go
income,
now. My planet needs me.
yeah, or that.
Oh, we have to say what we learned.
Chris,
Okay,
what'd you learn?
Nothing.
Great, Joe, what'd you learn?
Um,
Great, Brian, what'd you learn? Great, Alec, what'd you learn? I learned that doing this is hard. If you want to contact us, you can actually contact us at pauseandselect@squarespace.com. Squarespace at pauseandselect.com. pauseandselect@squarespace.com probably doesn't exist. You can also contact at pauseandselect.com. Why would you? Why not?
It's true.
Does contact at pauseandselect.com go straight to Carl Sagan?
Yes.
Goes right to his grave.
Yeah.
There's just a wormhole that's just pouring digital mail onto his grave.
They're just like
He'd appreciate the worm.
they're just like an air-sealed iPad just at his tombstone, and it shows emails that people send us at Carl Sagan's grave.
Sounds about right. Definitely sounds like something we'd do.
One day.
Good job, you guys. We definitely did it.
This might be the first one of these I listen to.
I'm going to listen to it too, because I have no fucking clue what it's going to
I
sound
have
like.
no idea what Brian's gonna do. This was a complete clusterfuck.
It was the best.
He should treat us like a bad dog and just rub our noses in it and leave it all in.
I'm pretty sure the podcast after it's been edited is just going to be your section about Splatoon.
Parts of it were good. We had a couple of good discussions. We talked about Splatoon. We talked about Banjo-Kazooie. We talked about Squarespace.
I love Squarespace.
Cool. We did it, you guys. Let's goodbye.
Have a good night.
My life.